Now, as political parties proceed with their electioneering and launching of manifestos, the Commission for Gender Equality says it will be monitoring the essence of these elections through a gender lens. The Commission has the responsibility to monitor and assess the actions of state and non-state institutions in the furtherance of the country's constitutional obligation to promote, protect and advance gender equity in South Africa, or gender equality as well. Now, to talk about the various parties' policies on gender, sexual harassment and GBV policies, Labour lawyer Natasha Moni is here in studio with me. She's attorney at Moni's Attorneys Incorporated. And in our Pretoria studios, Tamara Mathebula is the acting chairperson, Commission for Gender Equality. Welcome to you both, ladies, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Perhaps let me start with you, Ms. Mathebula. You held a conference recently on the 27th of February, to be pointed, to examine the various parties' policies. What were your findings?
Thank you very much, and good evening to you and your viewers out there. Yes, I must say that last week we hosted a very successful summit which actually called 6 political parties, the big ones, into one room, because we wanted to talk about women's participation as well as women's involvement in political parties as they have launched manifestos and as they have actually finalized the lists to national and province. And we wanted to just call them and have a conversation on how they look at, their policies with the gender lens, and how they look at their own women within the political parties in terms of the role that they play, and also look at how women are looked at in terms of decision making in all of those political parties.
So what were your findings? I mean, I know that in 2014 you looked at the 6 major parties, and now you've had an opportunity, having given them feedback on what you felt was missing. What were your findings this time round at this meeting?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think the process that was started in 2014, we continued to actually look at the political parties, whether there is any change or is the status quo still the same. And what we discovered was that, yes, I think there is a bit of a regress. Political parties have actually regressed a bit in terms of ensuring that women's participation as well as involvement in decision making, especially in the top leadership, is concerned. So across the board, we did look at the fact that there were more men than women in the top 6, for an example. And again, we also looked across the provinces as well as the legislatures. And we did find out that, there are 2 women premiers, and there are 7 male premiers from 2014 to date. And again, we looked at the speakers as well as the deputy speakers, which they were more because there were more premiers as well.
Okay, so maybe...
But what we did...
What I was going to say is, maybe let me just ask that we show you in brief what the 3 main political parties, the ANC, the EFF and DA, have had to say about what they're proposing, because I know some of the things that you were dissatisfied with was how general some of them were. As you can see what the ANC is proposing now, let's take a look now at what the DA is proposing, and we'll also show you the EFF. And maybe while we do that, I'll ask you, Ms. Moni, do you think, just in terms of defining things like sexual harassment, what it is, the various behaviors, the good code of conduct, that some of these parties are satisfactory?
In short, no. And I agree with our other speaker, our other guest, that they have regressed. I don't think that the political parties are actually thinking or taking women seriously. We are 51% of the vote. And yet we, in the manifestos, especially the ANC, DA and EFF, it's combined and not taken out and highlighted and really not put up in the fore. I mean, the EFF states that the emancipation of women must come together with the emancipation of everybody. So they certainly are going to only look at the woman and sexual harassment and gender-based violence once they've been able to uplift the men.
But they do zone in on things like ensuring that their party members understand the danger of patriarchy as a system, on the emancipation of women, on misogyny. So they do zero in on areas that they think men should be aware of in terms of what undercuts women in political participation.
Yes, but are they walking the talk? Mm-hmm. Just last year, one of the deputy chair people of the EFF was taken to court and charged with sexual harassment, sexual assault, and also assault. And his comment to the charge was, well, we were wrestling and she by mistake fell on the printer. Now this case was placed into the January roll, and we haven't heard anything about it. And that's just the EFF. The DA have had a spate of sexual harassment within its own workplace, and they do very little about it. Firstly, they take it as a grievance, very serious sexual harassment. I mean, taking a woman's hand and placing it on your penis and say, strike here, is very, very serious sexual harassment. But they gave the perpetrator a slap on the wrist and a suspended sentence. It just doesn't cut it. It just shows us that their actions speak louder than the words on the manifesto. The ANC is perhaps the biggest culprit because they rely on the fact that there is this code of good conduct in terms of how to handle sexual harassment. And yet, time and time again, there are various people in power who have subjugated and suppressed women who deserve to be there and deserve to be our leaders.
And this is where I'd like to bring you in. As the Gender Commission, do you think that it's taken too long? I mean, as the governing party, they announced early this year that they believe that they must implement a sexual harassment policy. But some would say, as the oldest liberation struggle movement on the continent, why would it have taken so long? And as a Gender Commission, shouldn't you have pushed for this long before the ANC was so-called forced to do this?
Yes, no, you are right. And I want to agree with Natasha to say, you know, there are delays in terms of dealing with these sexual harassment cases in the workplace. First of all, from all those political parties that participated last week in our conference, we discovered that not even a single one of them has a gender policy or a gender-based violence policy, nor a sexual harassment policy. Then that makes it difficult for a particular political party that is faced with a sexual harassment case, whether it's inside or it happened outside the workplace, to deal with it, because there is nothing that guides, or there are no guidelines for that particular political party to use or to look at in terms of dealing with the case. So the delays would actually start there. And I think they did make a commitment that from the conference, they will all go away and make sure that they develop those sexual harassment policy or gender-based violence policy. And we are actually saying that should those be drafted, we would like to have a look at them and see whether they are encompassing, because sometimes you will find that gender-based violence policies are just narrowly viewed to actually address just one aspect, yet there are a lot of broader aspects that need to be addressed, and action by step actions that need to be taken place should sexual harassment take place at the workplace.
Ms. Moni, let me come to you. Just, I was looking at an IPU report, International Parliamentary Union, talking about the number of women who are sexually harassed in a parliament as a result of there being women. And my question is, when you look at these policies, are they using gendered language in order to get away with what they say is a sexual harassment policy or proposals on GBV? Do they take into account the various forms of violence inflicted on women because there are women participating in politics?
Yes, they do, and it encompasses verbal, non-verbal, physical acts against a woman. They have to be unwanted. In other words, she must have said, I don't like that, thank you very much, please don't do that again. But the Labour Court has quite recently turned round to women and turned round to perpetrators and said, actually, you should know better. She doesn't have to continue setting her boundaries, telling you no, no, no all the time. Once she says no, that's it. You should allow her to continue on in the workplace. May I just bring to your attention that it's not just women. It is across the spectrum of sexes. And so only on Thursday, the courts gave a 10-year suspended sentence for a man who killed a gay man who was coming on to him. And they said that because he was scared of gays, that was sufficient for the mandatory sentence of 25 or 20 years to be lowered to a suspended sentence of 10 years. This is not good enough. This is the courts actually not walking the talk either. And what has the ANC or our government done about it? Absolutely nothing. We don't hear about that at all. I have a suggestion for all those women and men who experience sexual harassment, sexual assault in the workplace. The Code of Good Conduct says, firstly, report it immediately. And there are reasons why you should do that. But secondly, my suggestion is that often companies don't assist. Or they assist, but it takes too long. Why don't you go to the magistrate's court and get an interdict against him? That will preclude him from coming to work, and then he has the serious problem and not you.
You know, just looking at the DA's policies, for instance, they do go on about how processes or procedures when reporting acts of violence against women and children should be expedited, the timelines. But I think the point is correct that the LGBT community is not mentioned, and even acts as asking somebody about their sexuality not seen as something that is offensive to vulnerable community. Again, I'll go back to the point of what has the CGE done in the past to emphasize this to the various political parties, because this is not the first meeting that you are having with them. Is it lack of awareness or simply ignorance?
Yes, what we have done previously basically is to say that, should those policies be drafted or the code of conduct, they should actually look at addressing issues that directly affect women, that affect men, that affect young women, young girls, boys, as well as children. But above all of that, we also indicated and recommended that issues of or issues affecting LGBTIQA communities should be accommodated in those policies. We further said that some of the areas that have never been looked at are issues that are affecting women or men with disabilities, because you will find that all the vulnerable groups and people living with disabilities have never been looked at. And many a times you will find that people with disabilities usually suffer in silence because no one ever thinks that, these people should actually be involved in policies, and they are actually the targets for people to be sexually harassed or abused either at the workplace or other institutions, for an example. So we have made quite recommendations around
Ms. Mathebula, we often talk about representation, but the power that comes with that representativity in these organizations, it almost seems to be implied, but that is not necessarily the case. And I ask this, given the fact that there's been an uproar in this country about the alleged assault of Singabebs Wodumo, and a lot of those, as Ms. Moni was pointing out, were people who had the power to make policy changes and ensure that there was immediate action and protection for people in such vulnerable situations. Your response to that? Ms. Mathebula?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we are saying that those policies should be made. For an example, if you look at the work that CGE has done in institutions, in government, in private sector, and everywhere else, we are actually saying that those policies must be developed, the policies must be implemented, and organizations and institutions must be compliant to gender equality. Because if institutions are not compliant, we usually monitor whether there is compliance, whether you are a government institution, whether you are a political party, whether you are a private sector or a civil society sector. We have done quite a lot of work in the private sector, the mines. We have done a lot of work with institutions. We have done a lot of work with universities, for an example. I'm just mentioning few, and government departments, a lot of them, national and provincial. And where we feel that we have monitored, we have investigated, and there's no compliance, we usually call them in for a hearing. And we want to see that people are compliant. And if they are not, we definitely subpoena them.
Allow me to come to Ms. Moni. Let's talk about femicide watch, which you're suggesting that maybe that's something that we should be talking about. The ANC in this policy does call for harsher sentences, but are they a deterrent, just given some of the complexities within the criminal justice system? The fact that sometimes women do not get the necessary help because of a lack of appreciation of their experiences or even how to handle a person in such a situation.
Absolutely, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think that it's a culmination of factors. But let's look at the stats. The stats are that only 8.3% of all rapes that are reported are charged. The rapists are charged, and out of that, 88.3% get more lenient sentences than the mandatory sentence, which should be given to rapists. And therein, I think, lies the problem. That all these organizations, I mean, the Gender Equality Commission does the most fantastic work, but they don't have any teeth. And the last time I spoke to one of their prosecutors, they don't have any money either. So again, I'm not being facetious when I say that they're not walking the talk. The DA in its manifesto rightfully says that they would do away with the woman's position in the presidency. Well, I agree with them, because what are they doing? Where have you seen the ANC Women's League coming out in favor of Mabe, in favor of having a disciplinary inquiry against him, as opposed to allowing him to step down? That's giving the perpetrator dignity, and the victim, where's her dignity?
Well, fortunately, the minister in the presidency, Ms. Mathebula, will be here to answer to that question. I'm sure Stephen will be happy to put it to her. But just coming back to Ms. Mathebula, financing has been something that you've complained about, that the stakeholders not doing enough to capacitate you to increase your sphere of influence. And, of course, do you think you would need more powers to play a harder line with political parties that are not taking seriously your recommendations on how to implement some of these policies? Because it's one thing having them, implementing them is another.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think the stakeholders were quite vocal in terms of saying the Commission would need more power. the Commission would need more resources in terms of handling what is happening around the political parties and the institutions that I earlier alluded to. And yes, I tend to agree with them, because I think when you look at the resource allocations to the Commission for Gender Equality, yes, we would definitely require more funding and more allocation so that we can go out and reach more and do more work out there. In terms of power, I can say yes, we do have power. We derive power from the Constitution, Section 1872, and we also derive power from this Commission for Gender Equality Act as amended, and we do have power. It's just the resources that we need to make sure that we reach length and depth in South Africa for us to be able to do what we are supposed to do according to our mandate.
Just to go back to the issue of Babes Wodumo, because when we talk about finances here, we also need to look at the economic independence of women and their ability to be able to fight for themselves. A lot has been made about the relationship between the two. Critics against Mampintsha saying that you not only physically but prevented her in terms of pursuing her professional career in being able to leave the relationship. Is the law clear on a situation like this where people live together and work together? He's her manager. How complex is this going to be?
It's very complex. I think by the way that people are describing the relationship as if she's been groomed, and groomed in many respects, not only sexually, but other things as well. This is a woman who was found by this man. He's mentored her, coached her, guided her into the position that she finds herself today. She's a star. She's publicly out there. And she unfortunately has a contract that signs all her financial independence to him. So she's financially dependent on him by the sounds of it. And that is a very difficult situation to be in. And one of the reasons I was wondering why she had not left him beforehand, it really does make sense. She can't, or she believes that she can't. But in terms of the employment relationship, he really has broken her ability to trust him. He's breached that covenant, I believe that any attorney would take that contract and be able to make it void to assist her in getting out of it.
And just finally, from the Gender Commission, how do we fight some of these systemic hindrances? Because that's what it is. Had she wanted to leave, and people say she could leave, surely the system itself prevents her from doing that. What would the Gender Commission say should be done to transform the system?
Yes, I'm a bit concerned because we're talking about Babes Wodumo, who signed contract with another recording company, but was forced to leave that recording company and join Mampintsha's recording company. This is something difficult, and you will find that in a relationship like that, it's really about power. It's about control. It's about controlling everything around you. And if you look at types of gender-based violence, you will find that gender-based violence cuts across. You are controlled in terms of your economic, your social, your life you're actually controlled by this individual. But I think in terms of the system, first and foremost, I think we should applaud Babes Wodumo that after all this time, she has managed to actually record, first of all. There was a tape recorder that was found, and she was also able to go to the nearest police station. Because if you look at the types of gender-based violence and the situation that she is in, it's sometimes very difficult for a partner to actually come out and go and report a case to the nearest police station in that kind of a relationship. And as Gender Commission, we are saying we would monitor the case. we would make sure that justice takes its course, and Babes Wodumo is actually protected.
More discussion on that with the Minister in the Presidency, Batamile. Labour lawyer Natasha Moni here in studio with me, of attorney at Moni's Attorneys Incorporated, and in our Pretoria studios is Tamara Mathebula, the acting chairperson for Commission for Gender Equality. Thank you so much to you both. So we're taking a quick break and we'll be back with Stephen.